right, we're recording. We're good to go. That's my test sheet. All right, cool. So questions on the ODP?
Not necessarily, but I will say that putting the return in the right spot's a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. And either this week or next week, probably this week, we're going to start talking about a debugging tool called GDB. And this is a big part of the course. GDB is kind of your go-to tool, especially in C, when you've got a program and it looks right and it should be doing something that's just not working. GDB is a way to debug and help figure out what's going on. Now, if you don't have GDB, what do? You start putting print statements in your code, right? And that works great. That's an easy way to see, you know, what exactly your code is doing, and if there's something strange going on with the flow of the code, if it's exiting too soon or not doing a section of code or something, that'll pop up. But you know, it can be a pain to put print statements throughout your code to fill in all of that and then get rid of them afterwards and so on. So GDB will be a nicer way to do that. But you can always go back to print statements in one form or another.
It would be really nice to finally know how it works on a command line level, because usually the things that use GDB that I use are all like graphical user interfaces.
Right. And those are nice. I mean, that can be, you know, a nice efficient way to debug. But yeah, we'll be using GDB from the command line, and then you'll see what's actually going on behind the scenes, which is cool. Sometimes you're building a piece of hardware, right, and you're trying to debug it. If you can find one LED that you can commandeer, right, you can use that for your print statements. You know, you can blink once at this part of the system and blink 2 times when this other thing is happening, and so on. You can get really creative with debugging and adding information to help you know what's going on. But GDB will almost inevitably sooner or later be your favorite tool for debugging. It takes time. For some people it takes more time than others, but inevitably people have an aha moment and realize, hey, this is really useful. So we'll play around with that this week. All right, send me an attendance ping. Tell me you're here. And let's just eyeball that latest ODP.
How do you do that thingy where I understand the $sign Linux when you SSH into it, but how is it that you skip doing the password?
Oh, let me answer that in a second. Let me do 413 while we're here, and then we'll talk about how to log in quickly. This was the count E function to count the number of E's in a string. And you can do it like this, right? So I included string.h because I was using the string length function. And so a for loop, I starts from 0. You want to go less than string length. If your string is HELLO, 5 characters, your last character is in position 4. So the typical way you iterate through a string is from 0 to 1 less than the string length. And then just if argument I is a single quote E, it's got to be a single quote, increment my counter, and then return the counter at the end.
I just used as long as I index the array as not the null terminator.
Right, so that's another way you can do this. It's exactly the same effect. You could iterate while arg bracket I in this case is not equal to quote, single quote, backslash 0. And this character right? Inside single quotes, that's ASCII character 0. It's really just an 8-bit version of a 0. But if you do it like this, it's standardized, right? Technically, you could just see if it's equal to 0. Technically, you could see if it's equal to null, but you get all kinds of warnings and everything. So if you want to look for the character that's the null terminator, use that \0. So any version of this will get you there. And if you wanted to check for that in here, for example, you could do, while our bracket I is not equal to the null terminator. So you'd want to initialize I to 0, and while element I is not the null terminator, do this check, and then just do an I++, and go on from there. Yeah, like someone said in chat. Thank you. All right. So passwordless login. This is convenient.
It's only something you can do if you have a Linux machine, right?
There's probably other ways you can do it. I think you should be able to set it up from Windows, but I don't know exactly where it would go. But Google passwordless login to Linux from Windows, and someone can probably tell you where to put it. But basically, in your home directory, you have a .ssh directory. It's hidden, and it has a few files in there. It's got your public and private keys that you created, possibly when you set up Git. It's also got a file called authorized keys, and if you go into your Linux machine and go under .ssh, there's a file under there called authorized keys. And basically you go inside here and you just put your public key. Let me double check. Let me double check something before I put this out there. Yeah, that's fine. So these are just public keys. So if on the Linux machine, go into your .ssh directory, make a file called authorized keys, and then inside that file, just paste your public key from your laptop, for example. And then when you try to log in, the system will use this public key, ask your laptop basically if it knows the private key, and if it does, it'll go ahead and log you in without asking for a password.
So what's in your authorized keys on your main, not on the server, the one that you have on your...
I had things set up so I could log into my laptop from across the room because I was lazy one weekend. And so it was the same setup. I was logging in from a Windows machine using VirtualBox, and so I had some keys set up in there. But yeah, any machine that you want to log into, you can set up an authorized keys file under your SSH directory, put in your public keys, and anybody who has the corresponding private key can then log in automatically. And that's nice, right? It's not going to, save you a lot of time, but if you log in a lot, which I do, it adds up. And more importantly, it stops me from having to change gears, right? If I want to, someone comes to office hours and they have a question about their GitLab submission, I can just, log into my test machine and I'm ready to go. All right, somebody asked about ternary operators. In C, and this is also useful in Verilog. Ternary operators are good there. So here's something that we typically do. If value is bigger than 5, x equals 0, else x equals 1. So there's a typical if-then-else statement, right? Not doing anything in particular, but it's just something to play with. So there's a typical if-then-else. We could write this in C as follows. We could say x equals, put in some condition, question mark, and then put in the value that we want to use if this condition is true, in this case is 0, colon, the condition if it's false, 1. This will do exactly the same thing as that. So the compiler reads this as, let's see if value is bigger than 5. If it is, I'm going to use the value 0 on the right side of this assignment statement, x will equal 0. If it's a 1, if it's not bigger than 5, then I'm going to use a 1 in place of this, and I'm going to say x equals 1. And it only works in some cases. If I wanted to say if value is bigger than 5, x equals 0, else y equals 1, I really wouldn't be able to do it like this. This is called a ternary operator. For some reason, when I... Go ahead.
Like you say, as an S, so in C it has to have an else. Is that right? It has to have the colon.
Yeah, you've got to have a colon here. But if I didn't want to change the value of x, I could just say colon x, and then this would become x equals x.
Oh, that makes sense.
And when I learned this, it was called interrogation. I don't know if that's what Koenig and Ritchie called it or what, but usually I just see it called the ternary operator. And you can use this in all kinds of places, right? You could say printf flag equals 1, interrogate, good, colon, bad. And this would print either good or bad depending on whether the value of flag was equal to 1 or different from 1. So it really just kind of evaluates this, and if this condition is true, then this becomes whatever is between the question mark and the colon. If it's false, it becomes whatever's between the colon and the closing parentheses. And if that's an argument to a function, that's what it is. If it's the right hand side of an assignment statement, that's what it is, and so on. So it's useful. It's not considered clunky or deliberately obscuring. It's considered good practice to use, but it just lets you take something like this and compactify it into one line, which can be nice sometimes.
I'd say not to use nested ternaries. Would that be right?
I think if you start nesting them, it can start getting clunky. But you could do that. That would be legal. X equals value bigger than 0. Right, so that would do something. If my value is positive, it would set x equal to a. If it's negative, it would set it equal to b. If it's 0, it would set it equal to c, I think. But yeah, that can start getting kind of needlessly confusing to read. All right, cool. Other questions?
What would an else if open ternary operator form?
Pretty much like this. So the general form of this would be something like if some condition right, so there's an if-else assignment pair. So you could say x equals condition interrogate a colon b.
That's not what I was asking.
Okay.
I was asking, like, let's say if you have like if condition do this, else if condition do this, else do this. How would you write that in ternary form?
You just did. That's what the nested was.
Yeah, that's where it starts to get kind of convoluted. So this would actually say if value is bigger than 0, x equals a. Else, if value is less than 0, x equals b, else x equals c.
Okay, sorry, I missed that.
That's okay.
I would recommend not doing that because nested ternaries are extremely confusing to everyone except for you.
And oftentimes to the person who's writing them too. Especially if it's late at night, you can spin your wheels a long time trying to debug this, because if one parenthesis goes off, you know. And nesting parentheses is a tricky thing in programming in general. If, for example, you forget, you know, one of these parentheses and you get an error saying missing parentheses, it's pretty tempting to just go ahead and put that parentheses somewhere, and your error will go away when you compile, but you might totally change the meaning of your statement, right? So if you don't have a pretty firm conviction that your parentheses are in the right place, don't do that statement. And if you write a statement with parentheses and you get a compile error saying, you know, you're missing one or something, don't just change it. Make sure you understand where the parentheses should go, because you can just get tangled up in all kinds of errors. And the same thing with curly brackets. And it's really common when you finish your code to compile and it says, you know, missing curly bracket, or, you know, unexpected curly bracket. And so you just go in, you like add one at the end or something like that. That'll fix your compile errors, and your program may do something completely different from what you thought. And this is one reason why we talk about indenting and sort of push that, because that will help you keep track of where these things should go. All right, other questions?
I was able to get the SSH key thing working.
Oh, cool, excellent. Yeah, it's oddly appealing to just be able to do that and not have to type in passwords. It's like such a small thing, but it feels so much more relaxed. All right, let's talk about VI. And I don't force people to use VI. I don't ask questions about VI on tests. I'm not going to ask you, you know, what does the following command do in VI or something like that. But I strongly recommend that people use VI, and that you try to get fairly fluent with VI when you do your editing. It's a very powerful editor. It's a fairly customizable editor, and it should be a tool. It should be something that helps you with your coding rather than something that you have to deal with, right? And this is kind of the general mindset of Unix at large, and it's certainly my mindset when I'm developing an environment to work in. I never want the computer to get in my way. I never want it to slow me down, right? So I want to, you know, hang something up in the garage. I'm going to open my toolbox. I'm going to take out a hammer. I'm going to find a nail. I'm going to hit the hammer with the nail a few times, put it into the wall, right? Imagine that you try to do that and you pick up your hammer and it says, you know, a new version is available. Click here to upgrade. And you got no choice. You got to click the upgrade button. And it starts downloading, and it tells you have to upgrade this other driver, and 30 minutes later your hammer is upgraded, and now the handle is like on top of the part that you're supposed to hit, right? And you've got to use it in some different way, right? If that was what our lives were like, right, we'd still be like, you know, trying to make fire by hitting rocks together. That's not how tools should work. But unfortunately, that's how most software tools work. You know, you use Office and you write documents, and one day you go in and it's upgrading, and now the toolbar looks different, you know, and the way you do this thing is totally different, right? So when you're working in something like Linux, right, you can avoid all of that. You can tailor your tools and set your tools up the way that you want. And there will be new tools that are developed over time. There'll be new features that are available. But I learned to use VI, do I want to admit this, but over 40 years ago. And I learned a handful of commands, and those are the commands I use today. And once in a while I learn a new command. I learned a new command a few years ago from teaching this course. But for the most part I use the same, maybe like 20 or 30 VI commands that I learned 4 decades ago. And I have good confidence that, for the rest of my life I'll be able to continue to use VI. And, VI changed into VIM. That was a new version and had new features and so on and so forth. But everything that I was able to do in VI, I can still do in VIM. And I don't even notice that I'm using Vim instead of VI. So it's worth finding, a tool set that is stable and that appeals to you and that you can learn how to use well. And I know this tiny little piece of VI, which is, got all these capabilities and so on. But if you know how to use, a tool in a certain way, you get very good at it. And so two main editors people like in Linux are VI and Emacs. Emacs is probably the more powerful, but don't say that in public because you'll start a flame war. But those are both very old editors that are extremely stable, very customizable, and super powerful. So I want to just kind of talk about some of the things you can do in VI. There's a video posted that goes through all of the things I'm going to talk about here, plus a lot more. And you can watch the video and get all of this from there. But I want to go through some of this anyway. And my suggestion is, don't try to memorize this. Don't try to force yourself to do things that are going to end up slowing you down, right? But I just want you to kind of see some of the things that you can do with this tool and keep it in mind, right? And sometime when you're trying to delete 5 lines from your file and you're backspacing through all of that, right? And you think, there is some way to delete lines really quickly. What was that, right? Then maybe go back and look it up, right? Maybe take some notes while we're talking, or watch that video. I think it's like 15 or 20 minutes, and take some notes and go back and figure out how to do something and try it out. And if you never use it, you won't remember it, no big deal. But if it's something that turns out to be really useful to you, you're going to use it again and again, you're going to start to remember it, and it's going to go into your toolkit. So with not a lot of particular order, let's just play around with VI a little bit. And I need a good file to work on. So here's a test file. All right. So you know how to get into VI, right? Just VI and the name of the file. There's a video on the YouTube channel that talks about how to use VI. It's one of the first videos in the playlist. So VI test, right, brings you into the file. If you do VI, a file that doesn't exist, it brings you into an empty file, and you can type stuff and so on. You can also, VI multiple files at one time. And so now I'm editing my file test, and then if I want to go to the next file, I can say :n to move to the next file, and I'm editing my next file. All right, so what can we do inside VI? And no need to ever apologize for questions. Questions are like the basis of all learning. All right, so here's the main thing. I don't know if I'm going to tag this heavily or not because the video is already tagged, but let me try it. So the main thing to know about VI is that there's two modes in which VI operates, which I call command mode and insert mode. So when you first come into VI, you just say VI file name, you're sitting here. And most people, the first thing they do is they type an I, and that puts you into insert mode. And at that point, whatever you type goes into your file. And if you have your arrow keys set up, which I don't, you could move down and you could backspace to delete text and so on and so forth. And that's kind of the end of VI for a lot of people, right? You go into insert mode, you type your stuff, and then when you're done, you hit an escape and you do :X or :WQ. All right, that's a really small part of VI. So once you're in VI, instead of typing an I to go into insert mode, if you just hang out here, we're in what's called command mode. And most of the commands that I'm going to talk about only work in command mode. And these are commands that you get by typing 1 or 2 characters. And if you're in insert mode and you type a character, it becomes part of your file. So by not saying I, by just sitting here, I'm in command mode. So so what can we do? We can move around. So you can use your arrow keys, but the official way to move around in VI is HJKL. It's kind of like WASD. But HJKL, so J moves down, K moves up, L moves to the right, H moves to the left. So it's like 4 little arrow keys. All right. Well, that's not a whole lot better than using the arrow keys. But you can also move around quicker. So you can hit a W, which says move forward 1 word. So this takes me to the /doc/bash/example/startup-files, right? And each time I hit W, it moves to another word. And words are things that are separated by, I don't know, separators, punctuation, spaces, things like that. And so I'm just hitting the W key, and you can see it's jumping around here. And that can be useful. And the reverse operation is B for backwards. So B moves back 1 word. And that's certainly a faster way to move around a line. And you can also put a number in front of these. So if I want to move forward 5 words, I could say 5W and move over there. If I want to move 10 words, I can say 10W and I move forward 10 words. So with a lot of punctuation, it's weird. But if I hit like 6W, right, that takes me over to the 6th word on that page, where words are, you know, not necessarily the way we think of words, but, you know, chunks of text. And you can go backwards also. I can go back 5 words and so on by hitting 5B. And you can use this for going up and down. So I'm sitting on line 12 right now. If I want to go down 30 lines, I can type 30 and a J, and now I'm sitting at line 42. If I want to go down 100 lines, I can say 100 and a J, and it takes me down 100 lines. So now I'm at line 142. And I'm doing a Control G, by the way, to see what line I'm on. So anytime you hit Control G, it shows you the name of your file, the current line, out of how many lines, the percentage, and what column you're in. So if I do a Control G over here, it looks the same, except I'm in column 15. So that's an easy way to know where you are. Now you can also turn on line numberings, but then you got to stare at line numbers all the time, and most of the time you don't care about the line number, you care about the code you're writing. And if you've got line numbers on the side, that might distract you. So Control G will tell you where you are. Is there a VI command list? Absolutely. And I don't think I've posted one on Canvas, but you can definitely find ones online. If you don't find a good one, let me know. But you know, the thing to do used to be to find little quick reference guides, like usually a 3-fold panel that would have all these commands summarized. Alright, so we can move around with HJKL. We can also move around more quickly by using Control D to go down and Control U to go up. And those go down and up half a page. So right now I've looking at enable programming completion features, if I hit Control D, that line moves up to here. And if I do Control U, it moves me up. So Control D, Control U moves you down and up. Control F will move you forward a whole screen. That's one of these commands I used for about 20 years. I don't use it much anymore. And Control B will move you back. I think maybe as I got older, it got harder to keep track of where I was, so I like just going half a screen at a time. All right, on a line, you can also move to one end or the other. So a $ will move me to the end of a line. A 0 moves me to the beginning.
Do home and end work in mode?
Let me see. So home does that, end does that. So yeah, for my setup, home and end seem to work. And page up and page down also seem to work.
Okay, cool.
But that can depend on how things are set up. So if you had trouble getting arrow keys to work and you downloaded that exrc file, that's a bunch of configuration commands that set up VI to understand the arrow keys. And it looks like by default it understands the home and end and page up and page down keys also. So 0 moves to the beginning, $ moves to the end, caret moves to the beginning, ignoring spaces in the start. So if I hit a caret, it takes me to the beginning of my text on a line. And that can be useful, if you've indented a bunch of levels and you want to get back to the start of the line where the text actually happens, you can use a caret. I don't really use carets much, but that works. All right, Control G tells you what line you're on. I'm on line 116. If you want to get to a particular line, like say line 20, I can say 20, hit an uppercase G, and that jumps to line 20. Control G confirms that's where I am. If I want to get to the start of my file, I can just do 1 and a Shift G. That's guaranteed to take me to the first line. If I want to get to the last line, I don't know what the line number is unless I Control G. But if I just hit a Shift G with nothing else, that takes me to the last line. So there I am, line 383. So moving around.
A list of all these would be really cool.
So I'm going off a set of notes that I wrote for myself for how to talk about these. I can certainly post this, and there's no explanation really for these, but you could play around with them. So I can pop this up on Canvas.
That'd be cool.
Is there a way to get line numbers to appear in the input?
Yeah, so set, I think number, turns that on. And if you say set no number, it takes them off. And if you just say set, it'll show you all the different things that are set. If you say set all, it will show you all the possible things that you can set or unset and different values. And there's a lot of them. All right, so getting in and out of VI. So I made all these changes up here at the top, and let's say I didn't want those, right? You can do :Q to say quit, but it won't let me. It'll say, hey, you've made some changes. So if I really want to quit without changing those, I can say, quit with an exclamation mark. That's going to quit. Same thing if you try to write a file and you don't have permission to write it, it'll give you an error, but if you could change the permission, it'll say use an exclamation mark to write. So I can do :W anytime I want to write my changes. If I just want to look at a file and I'm doing that in VI and I want to get out, just use a :Q. And that's nice because if you accidentally make changes to your file and you :WQ, you're going to save those changes. And if you made changes that you meant to save and you didn't, doing a :Q will remind you that you've got changes. It's probably bad practice to always exit VI with :WQ. Think about only saying write the file if you really, really want to write the file. It's even worse practice to exit VI by doing Control-Z. And I don't think people have started doing this yet, but if you do that, all kinds of bad things will happen.
Why is it bad to use WQ?
Because, maybe I was planning to type something like you know, done with my test or something, and I'm in command mode instead of insert mode, and maybe I end up making some changes to my file, or my arrow keys got funny and stuff like that, and I forget that all that happened. If I say :WQ, I just wrote all that stuff into my file. I lost the previous version of my file. So if I'm going into a file just to look around, right, and maybe I instinctively went into insert mode and I did this, so yeah, that doesn't work. Okay, so I do that and I look around. If I :WQ, I change it. If I :Q, it'll say, oh, ignore that. If I do that, it'll say, hey, you've made some changes, and I can think, you know, I don't really want to save those changes. Okay, I'll Q exclamation mark.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So if you happen to control Z, or if you're working on the Linux server and the connection goes south, and you get disconnected, right? And then you come back in and you try to edit your file. Oh, that didn't happen. Alright, so your server goes away, your connection dies and something, and you come back and you try to edit your file, you get this message, right? And this is telling you that there was a process that was working on editing your file, and that process didn't exit. And so theoretically, you or somebody else is in the process of editing this file right now. And if that's what's actually going on, if you're working with someone and you're both editing the file at the same time, that's bad, because your changes are going to undo each other's changes. So this is warning you, right? And usually when this happens, it means that you were editing a file and your connection went away, or you closed out your window by hitting the little X in the top, and you forgot to exit VI first, and so on. So what do you do if this happens? First thing I would do is :Q, right? Get out of there. Don't save anything, because something weird is going on. So make a copy of your file. I'll copy test to test keep me, right? So whatever state the file's in right now, I want to make sure that's preserved. And now I'm going to go in and VI test, and I'll just hit an enter to go in, and I'm going to look at my file, and I'm going to make sure this is the file I want. So you know, depending on what you were working on, okay, yeah, this file looks good. So now let's VI test, and you have options here, right? So it says you can use vim-r test to recover a saved version. Well, if your file had changes that you hadn't saved, you could try using this. Or you can just delete the swap file. So delete.test.swap. Okay, so I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to do an ls-a. This is the file that's causing that message to appear. As long as that file's there, anytime I VI test, I'm going to get that warning message. So if I just rm.test.swap, now when I VI test, I'm good to go. But remember, before you just delete this file to get rid of it, make sure that your file looks good. Because it may be, like I said, that you were in the middle of making some changes and you hadn't written those changes out yet. And maybe you made, you know, changes for an hour and you didn't write those, and then your machine crashed and you've got this swap file. Well, if you look at the version of test that's in your directory and it doesn't have those changes, you can try doing a vi-r test. That's the recover option, and it should read information from here and restore your file to close to where it was when things crashed. So that's the deal with the swap files and those error messages. All right, so let's continue. So you can move around lots of different ways. You can delete. So if you want to delete an entire line, you can just type 2 Ds, dd, that deletes the line. I've got, you know, several lines here I want to delete. If I want to delete 5 lines, I can say 5dd and get rid of those. Looks like I've got 6 more lines. I can do 6 DD and get rid of that.
I just figured out there's also a vimrc, like passwordless, so you can have a startup.
Yes.
So, like, if you like the numbers and the ruler like me, then you can put that on every line.
Yeah, so in your home directory there's a vimrc file, .vimrc, and you can put vi commands into that file and they get executed every time vi starts. So you can turn on line numbering, you can turn off syntax highlighting, whatever your taste is. All right, you can delete entire lines by saying dd. You can also delete a word by saying dw for delete word. So I want to get rid of interactively, I can just say dw, and that gets rid of that. You can delete a single character by using X. So I'm going to do H to go back here to the space. I'm going to hit an X, that gets rid of that. I'm still in command mode, right? I'm not going into insert mode for any of this.
What's the undo key?
U will undo your last change, but depending on your VI setup, it may only undo the last change. So if I hit U again, what's it do? It undoes the U command, which brings me back. If you haven't changed lines, you can also do a Shift U and undo everything you did on that current line. But that's got limited functionality. But you can also set it up to have multiple levels of undo. I believe :X is the same as :WQ, but I have never used :X. But I think it's the same thing.
Question.
Yeah.
So you said U is undo. Is that like identical to Control Z or?
No, Control Z will suspend my process, bring me back to my shell, and leave a swap file. And if you accidentally Control Z, you can do FG to go back to where you were.
I mean Control Z as in like normal text editors and such.
Oh yeah, basically the same behavior, except that by default it's only a single level of undo. And so if I hit U again, then it's kind of like a Control Shift Z or Control Y. It reverses the undo.
Okay. Professor, I have a question.
Yeah.
You know the command nano?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between that and VI? Different editor.
Yeah, I haven't used nano much, but I think it's a more kind of lower cost of learning editor. I think you move around with arrow keys and you can backspace and things like that. But I don't think it has sort of the whole battery of commands that you have in something like VI or Emacs. But that's another option.
I've used it a bit, and it's just kind of like the very beginning version of VI.
Yeah. All right, other things you can do. So you can do an X to delete a character. If I wanted to delete 3 characters, I can just do 3X, and it gets rid of 3 characters starting from my current position. 2X, get rid of 2 characters. X, get rid of 1 character. If I want to delete from my current position to the end of the line, I can do a Shift D, and that takes out everything from where I was to the end of the line. DD deletes a single line. Period is a really useful command. Period basically says repeat my previous command. So I just did DD to delete a line. If I hit period, it repeats my DD, deletes the next line. So if I want to get rid of everything down to, say this history file size equals 2000, I can do a DD and then just keep hitting period. And I can watch my file disappear one line at a time. When you delete something, it also goes into a temporary holding buffer, like a very small clipboard. And if I just type the letter P, it will paste whatever I just deleted right below my current location. So if I want to put this inside my case statement, I can say DD to delete it, go up here and put a P, and there it is. So you've got simple cut and paste, but you can also extend that. maybe I want to take these 3 comments, 3DD, and I want to put them up here after 4 examples. So I'll go up with a K, I'll hit a P, there's my 3 comments. And I'm not touching my mouse for any of this, right? You can do everything you need to do in a Linux shell without ever having to use the mouse. And mice are convenient. They're helpful for some things. I wouldn't want to use Tinkercad without a mouse, right? But they slow you down. They are a different mindset, right? Instead of doing output, you're doing an input-output loop, right? You're moving the mouse, you're looking at the arrow, you're seeing where it is, and you're making a change in response to that. You're in a feedback loop now, right? If I want to select these 2 lines, I have to do this little feedback loop to know when my cursor is at the end of this line. And then I click and I move and I wait until my feedback tells me that my lines are selected, and then I can go ahead and copy and paste, right? If I'm in command mode and I want to move these 2 lines, I just 2DD and then go where I want it and paste. Yeah, if your number pad messes you up, this is an alternative to that also. All right, and if you want to do more general yank and paste, for example, I've got 4 lines up here. If I don't want to delete them, but I just want to copy them, I can do a 4 and an uppercase Y, and it tells me 4 lines have been yanked. I can go in my file where I want them and type a P, and it will paste them, and it tells me there's 4 more lines. You can also join lines with a Shift J. So if and this will be weird in here, but if I wanted to put these 2 statements on the same line, this line and the next one, I can just do a Shift J, and it brings those together. And every time I Shift J, it joins my current line with the line following it. And if I wanted to join, you know, all my lines into a file, I could do 1000 Shift J, and you know, my whole bash RC is 8 lines. And it doesn't really like displaying that. Let's do a 20 Shift J. There you go. All right, so we'll continue this tomorrow. Send me an attendance note on the way out. But we'll wrap this up tomorrow. I'll talk about inserting, because we do want to insert sometimes, but there's a lot of ways we can insert besides just saying I. So we'll talk about different ways to insert. And then we'll talk about searching, and then doing things from the VI command line, and that should give us a good smattering of things we can play with. I'll post up a command summary sometime later on today, and we can use that. All right, have a great rest of your day. I will see you tomorrow.
Have a good rest of your day as well.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye.
Have a good one.